My name is Sarah, and I'm a 22-year-old woman still figuring out life. I've always been drawn to the ordinary, routine days and comforting friendships. But this is not an ordinary story. This is a steamy, fiery tale of how everything I thought I knew about love and desire changed in ways I never expected. I always thought of Ryan as just my neighbor, a good guy, the type you could rely on to water your plants or grab your mail when you were away. He lived right across the hall, and in a city that could feel so lonely, he was a comforting presence. We met 2 years ago, when I moved into this apartment complex. At 22, fresh out of college, I was trying to figure out my place in the world. Ryan was the same age, still finishing his degree in architecture. He was the kind of person everyone liked, kind, easygoing, and with a laugh that could light up a room. I'd be lying if I said I never noticed how good-looking he was. With his messy brown hair, warm hazel eyes, and the kind of smile that felt effortless, Ryan had an undeniable charm. But he was always just Ryan. My friend. My go-to movie buddy. The guy who'd order pizza with me at midnight after a long day. For so long, I thought that was all he would ever be. But things have a way of changing when you least expect it. It started a few weeks ago. I'd broken up with my boyfriend of 8 months, and Ryan, as usual, was there to comfort me. We sat on my couch, a bottle of wine between us, as I vented about how emotionally unavailable my ex had been. Ryan listened, as he always did, his gaze steady and reassuring. But there was something different in the way he looked at me that night, something that made my stomach flip in a way I couldn't ignore. "You deserve better, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Someone who sees you for who you are and doesn't let you go." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. His words lingered in the air, heavy with a meaning I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I changed the subject quickly, brushing it off as just another sweet thing Ryan would say. But that night, after he left, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me, the way his voice had dipped into something deeper. Over the next few days, I started seeing Ryan differently. It wasn't just his looks, though those were hard to ignore. It was the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to genuinely care about the people in his life. I'd catch myself watching him when he wasn't looking, noticing things I'd never paid attention to before, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way his jaw clenched when he was focused on something. It was maddening, this new awareness of him, and I didn't know what to do with it. One evening, as we sat in his apartment watching a movie, the tension between us became impossible to ignore. I was hyper-aware of the space between us on the couch, the accidental brushes of his hand against mine. My heart was racing, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. Ryan must have noticed, because he paused the movie and turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, is something wrong?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. How could I explain the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me? How could I tell him that I was starting to see him as more than a friend, that the idea of losing him terrified me more than anything? "No, it's nothing," I finally said, forcing a smile. "I think I'm just tired." He didn't look convinced, but he let it go, pressing play on the movie. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze, my thoughts consumed by the man sitting next to me. Little did I know, that night was only the beginning of a shift that would change everything. The next day, I found myself in the kitchen, baking cookies, a nervous habit I developed over the years. Ryan knocked on the door, as he often did, drawn by the smell of chocolate and sugar. "You know, you're going to spoil me with all these treats," he said with a grin, leaning against the counter as I pulled the tray out of the oven. I rolled my eyes, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened at his closeness. "Consider it payment for all the times you've fixed my leaky faucet." We laughed, the sound filling the small space between us. But then his laughter faded, and his gaze softened. "You've been different lately," he said, his tone gentle. "Is everything okay?" I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. This was it. The moment I'd been avoiding. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for an answer. "I've just been thinking a lot," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "About us." There it was, out in the open. The words hung between us, heavy with possibility. Ryan's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. He took a step closer, and suddenly the air felt electric. "What about us?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't know. It's just, I think I'm starting to see you differently. And it scares me." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought he might pull away. But then he smiled, a small, knowing smile that made my breath catch. "Sarah, I've always seen you differently," he said. And just like that, the walls I'd built around my heart began to crumble. I could barely sleep that night. Ryan's words echoed in my mind, intertwining with the image of his smile, that warm, disarming smile that now held a completely different meaning. I spent hours pacing my apartment, replaying every moment we'd shared. How had I missed it? The way he'd always been there for me, the lingering glances, the unspoken connection that now felt impossible to ignore. The next morning, I resolved to put some distance between us, at least until I could figure out my feelings. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. I was on my way to the mailbox when Ryan appeared in the hallway, his hair still damp from a shower and a casual grin lighting up his face. He held a box of donuts in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. "Morning," he said, his voice easy, as though the previous night hadn't turned my world upside down. "I brought breakfast. Thought we could eat together." My resolve wavered instantly. How could I say no to him? Reluctantly, I nodded, and he followed me back to my apartment. We sat at my small kitchen table, the aroma of coffee mingling with the sugary scent of the donuts. As we ate, the conversation stayed light, college projects, our quirky neighbors, anything but the elephant in the room. But I could feel the tension simmering just beneath the surface, growing with every glance he threw my way. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Ryan," I said, setting down my coffee. "About last night." He leaned back in his chair, his hazel eyes meeting mine. "What about it?" I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. I don't know what to do with this. With us. You've been my best friend for so long, and now everything feels different." "Different isn't always bad, Sarah," he said softly, his gaze steady. "Sometimes it's exactly what we need." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and before I could think twice, I blurted out, "Why didn't you ever say anything? If you've always seen me differently, why didn't you tell me?" He smiled ruefully, running a hand through his messy hair. "Because you always looked at me like I was just Ryan. And I didn't want to ruin what we had." His honesty hit me like a tidal wave, and suddenly, all the barriers I'd built between us seemed pointless. I reached across the table, my hand brushing against his. It was a small gesture, but the intensity in his eyes told me it meant so much more. The rest of the day blurred into a whirlwind of emotions. We didn't leave my apartment, too wrapped up in the gravity of what was unfolding between us. It wasn't just about the attraction, it was about the years of friendship, the trust we'd built, and the undeniable pull that now seemed impossible to resist. By evening, the air between us was heavy with unspoken desire. We sat on the couch, close enough that our knees touched. Ryan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his touch gentle and deliberate. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart pounding. I've never been more sure of anything. What happened next was a cascade of quiet intensity, a series of moments strung together like pearls on a fragile thread. His lips on mine, soft and searching. The way his hands cupped my face, as though I were something precious. It wasn't rushed or frantic, it was deliberate, an unspoken acknowledgement of how much this meant to both of us. We spent the rest of the night in each other's arms, exploring the depth of this new connection. The warmth of his skin against mine sent shivers through me, each soft caress a silent promise. I could feel his breath on my neck, steady and warm, the sound of it mixing with the soft rhythm of our hearts beating in sync. His hands roamed with a newfound boldness, tracing the curve of my back, pulling me closer. My body responded in ways I hadn't expected, and it made my heart race, a mix of excitement and uncertainty. There was something about the way his lips lingered on mine, soft yet insistent, like he was trying to imprint himself on me. The desire was undeniable, thick in the air between us. I could feel the tension building, every moment stretching, pulling us closer to something neither of us could fully comprehend. And still, I didn't pull away. I let him explore me, let myself drown in the feeling of finally surrendering to something real. It wasn't rushed, not at all. Every moment was drawn out, every whisper of his name like a secret between us. I felt the depth of the connection building in the quiet spaces between the kisses, in the way he touched me as if I were the most precious thing he'd ever held. By morning, the sunlight streaming through the windows found us tangled in the sheets, his arm draped over me as we lay in a blissful, wordless haze. It was everything I never knew I wanted, an intimacy that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But as we lay there, I couldn't shake the nagging thought in the back of my mind. This was uncharted territory, and I had no idea what it would mean for us moving forward. Would this deepen our bond, or would it tear us apart? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain, there was no going back now. For better or worse, the walls between us had come down. We couldn't ignore the change, no matter how much we tried. It was in the way our eyes lingered just a second longer, the way we both seemed to gravitate toward each other, even when we didn't say a word. Every moment felt charged with possibility, and I was both terrified and exhilarated by it. One evening, after an intense conversation about the future and the fear of what could happen between us, we found ourselves standing too close in my apartment. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the air between us crackling with desire. Ryan reached out, his hand brushing against my arm. That small touch sent a surge of heat through me, and I couldn't hold back anymore. "I need to kiss you, Sarah," he whispered, his voice low and rough. His words were a breathless confession, a plea I couldn't deny. The moment his lips met mine, everything else faded away. There were no more doubts, no more hesitation. It was as though all the years of friendship, all the time we'd spent together, had led to this one perfect moment. The kiss deepened, the air around us thick with longing. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I could feel the intensity of his touch as his body pressed against mine. The world outside our small apartment no longer existed. There was only Ryan, only the heat between us, and the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered. We spent the night together, the hours passing in a blur of soft caresses, whispered words, and deep, overwhelming connection. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something I'd never expected. This wasn't just a fling, a one-night thing. It was a new chapter, a shift in everything I thought I knew about us. Every touch, every kiss, every moment felt more profound than the last, and I knew there was no going back. As the night turned into morning, we lay tangled in the sheets, the warmth of his body beside mine grounding me in a way nothing else ever had. My heart still raced, my body still thrummed with the energy of what we'd shared. But beneath it all, there was a quiet certainty. Whatever happened next, whatever this turned into, we had crossed a line. And though it terrified me, I couldn't regret a single moment of it. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew one thing for sure: the moment I allowed myself to truly see Ryan, see him as more than just a friend, was the moment my life changed forever. And I couldn't wait to see where it would take us.